Happy New Year. To start with, I am going to be starting out the meeting as chair until we are through the voting process for wake up call for the chair for the West Resource Recovery Committee. So with that, I call the meeting to order at 1:01, and the first item of business, item 3 on our agenda, is the election of the committee chair. 3.1 is the call for nominations. So my first call for nominations for the chair of the West Resource Recovery Committee, please. Leah?
Yeah, thank you, Uli. I would like to nominate Walter Popoff to be chair of this committee.
Thank you. Walter, would you accept it?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. A second call for nominations for the chair for the West Resource Recovery Committee. And I call a third and last time for nominations. Seeing none, Walter, by acclamation, the chair position is yours. I clear the area. You want to...
Actually, if I can do it from here.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
Then I turn it over to Director Popoff, or Chair Popoff, sorry, for the rest of the meeting.
Yeah, you have to make a declaration of elected or reclaimed for committee chair.
Yes.
Item 3.4.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. So I hereby declare Director Popoff as chair for 2025 through acclamation as our West Resource Recovery Committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Uli. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody had a restful holiday and we're ready to go at it. And but I think we're going to have a really tough start looking at the budget here. It's a very big and comprehensive budget. I had I think as part of my being chair here, I'd like to thank everybody for their support and for me being chair. But I thought I'd give you a little bit of a history. If you've got a couple of minutes here, I've been involved in resource recovery since 2010. I believe at that time I was part of the resource recovery plan that completed 2010. I also was part of the policy that shared services between Central and West subregions for cost efficiencies. And this is where we have Central taken their waste down to Otishenya. And that helps us out financially in our operations. And there is a formula for calculation, how much they contribute. I also was involved in the resource recovery plan in 2021, which was approved in 2023. And was part of the negotiations with Recycle BC on the number of core depots that we were going to have in the regional district. We ended up with 12. And somehow, I don't know how, but we ended up with 6 in West Resource Recovery. And it wasn't my plan, but that's how it landed. And then, further on is we take a look at the unfairness of West having 6. We staff developed an equalization distribution of funds amongst the 3 subregions for the core depots. So this, in the budget, you'll see that we are providing some funding to Central and East Resource Recovery because we have more core depots. I also was part of the establishment of the regional district organics program. And now we're going to be addressing the system efficiency study report prepared by GHD Limited. So when I checked with staff, when I put in my comment on the system efficiency study report, I was told I was the only one that did that. mind you, I understand we all had holidays and everything else, but this director works on holidays. So I hope that gives you an idea of my dedication to resource recovery for the past 14 years. And again, I appreciate your support and chairing West Resource Recovery for 2025. So I hope you don't mind my little preamble, a little bit of a history, what my involvement in resource recovery was or is. So now I'd like to acknowledge and respect the Indigenous peoples within whose traditional lands we are meeting today. And a motion to adopt the agenda would be appreciated. Director Main, and seconded Director Hanegraaff. Thank you. Any additions or comments on the agenda that we should consider? I don't see it. That's coming next.
Okay, no, I didn't see it on the agenda.
I have Chair of Central remind me about the freedom of the floor. So we have a motion and a seconder, and I declare that agenda be adopted as circulated. And now I would like to entertain a motion, freedom of the floor, for Central Resource Recovery Chair, Director Neal, and East Resource Recovery Chair, Director Jackman. Director Main, and seconded Director Weatherhead. And normally I call for discussion, but any objection? Seeing none. Director Neal and Director Jackman, you have freedom of the floor. We have received the minutes from the September 11th, 2024 West Resource Recovery Committee meetings, and any comments on the minutes? Okay, seeing no comments, the minutes are part of that. So the next item is item number 6, and tipping fee assessment and system efficiency study. I don't know if you'd want us comment on that. We had that presented back in November, and we referred the closure of Winlaw Recycling Depot to this meeting. So do you want to comment on that or anything?
Sure. Through the chair, the report from, sorry, was it November?
October.
Right. Is included for the background on that decision. So it looks like it's on page 18 of the agenda package. There's table 8 talking about the facility operating costs. So the Winlaw Depot is one of the more expensive depots. Cost per ton at that depot is just over $2,000 per ton to $2,384. And the overall annual operating costs are just over 33,000. So the recommendation, and this assessment was based on identified sites that were within, I think it was 30 kilometers of another depot and was less than 50 kgs an hour. And so it identified these three depots, and the Weimar transfer station is fitting in that capture. And so the recommendation was to close the Winlaw Recycling Depot. As the chair mentioned, it was deferred to this meeting. As a comment, when we get to the S188 recycling service, it still has the Winlaw value in it, so that would be a cost reduction. So it would reduce the transfer from S188 by that value there. So.
Well, thank you, Amy. Since the Winlaw Recycle Depot falls in Area H, and I probably will have to answer to some of the residents that will be upset if it is closed. So I'd like to move the recommendation, and if I have a seconder. Director Main. And discussion. I will start the discussion on this depot, just a little bit of a preamble. I did look into it, and a lot of the depots are based on tonnage. One of the concerns I had is the amount of people that use that depot. I did talk to the person that looks after that depot on in there, and that person mentioned to me, Walter, she said, that there's not too many people that use that depot. Right, as the average is around 10 people when they're open for the day. So that clinched it, and then as compared to the Crescent Valley Depot, which gets over 100 people per day. So the other thing about this was we as staff was going to look at the Crescent Valley Depot and the tonnage accepted there. And, you know, based on the decision on that, whether to reduce the hours or possibly even increase the hours. My concern on that is I find that at that depot, not much tonnage gets in there, but a lot of people use it. They bring in maybe a bucket or two of recyclables. So that's possibly why the tonnage is low. But anyways, that's my comment on it. Anybody else want to comment?
Just wanted to point out, Director Davidoff joined us a bit later, had difficulties to sign up, so he's here now, but I don't know if we need to repeat anything for him.
So Director Davidoff, the recommendation on item number 6 is to close Winlow Recycling Depot. I've moved that, being seconded. We're having a discussion on it. And then I'll call the question if anybody's opposed. Director Main, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a comment before we go to calling the question, which is I'm getting an echo.
Director Davidoff, it looks like you may be logged in twice.
So there appear to be 3 microphones on, which is why I'd be getting an echo. But I just want confirmation that closing the Winlaw Recycling Depot in 2025 will represent a decrease in costs of $33,382, which is a notable figure, although it's not, it's not huge compared to the size of budgets we're looking at. But I just wanted to note that it does represent a savings and what that savings is. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any further discussion? I don't see any, so I will not call for in favor because most of the people are attending virtually. So anybody opposed? Seeing no opposition, it's carried. And that will be reflected in the budget.
Let me speak
Yes, go ahead.
to this item, not specifically to the depot, but in regards to our workshop and the survey responses around the efficiency report. Staff was directed to set up a workshop, and as Chair Popov pointed out, it was only his response. We will make another attempt and send out a form, I believe, a form that is a bit more specific in regards to responses. I really urge directors to provide us feedback, what specific questions, issues, or concerns you have in regards to this study and outcomes out of that, or recommendations out of that. I feel if we don't get sufficient response, that we will bounce this off Joint Resource Recovery Committee if it is even worthwhile to have this workshop. So I urge you to provide us with feedback that will help us, A, to prepare for the meeting, B, set the agenda accordingly, and have a focused discussion around the main concerns that we can identify. If we don't hear the concerns, don't get the feedback, it will be difficult for us to really set something meaningful up. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leah. And I'd like to echo Louie's concern, and realizing it was Christmas holidays and there were people that had family down, did not have time to do that. I myself had a plumbing leak, so I spent a lot of that time, but I did find, I was late. I did respond on Saturday evening. So, excuse me. would appreciate if, the directors take the time to take a look at it and provide some response so we can have a workshop. Amy?
And just to add to that, through the chair, Heidi is developing a form, so it will prompt you a little bit more for some engagement, and there'll be lots of open-ended. So don't, you're welcome to send an email as well, but we'll be sending that out in the next few days. So you can just wait until that, and it'll be a reminder to engage. But I think it'll be an easier way for you to provide some info.
Well, thank you. Anybody would like to comment on that? If that's the direction that we should be going, or do you have any suggestions? Okay, we'll move on to what we're here for. It is the draft budget. So item number 7, and I'll turn it over to Amy. So just before we do that, when would you like to take questions? When would be easier for you to take the questions after each subheading? Like, for example, after acquisitions, take questions on that and then go forward. Anything that's in the gray in the budget or whatever, take questions after that.
Through the chair, I think, there's a lot of accounts that have very little adjustment or they're fairly low values, so I might not stop at everyone, but I certainly will stop at the bigger ones. But I think it's a good idea to ask questions throughout the budget so that we're not trying to save them up to the end and jumping back and forth a ton. But I'll try and stop it at intervals and check if there's questions, but Emma can maybe monitor the chat and people can pipe up with questions as we go.
Okay, so yeah, you've heard Amy there. So if you feel that you have a question when she's doing something, please, either put your hand up by monitoring the screen or put your name in chat, or if you're not recognized, then, basically say, I'd like to have a question, so we will recognize you then. Okay, go ahead, Amy.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I will go along with the number, the line items on the leftmost column. So getting through the requisition. So this year is an 8% increase, which was what was budgeted in the last financial plan for this year. The last financial plan had an 8% increase for 25, 26, and 27, and then it had a 6% increase in 28. In this draft financial plan, it's an 8% increase annually throughout the entire 5-year term. So that was the only change in the requisitions from previous. Any questions on taxes?
So I don't see anybody in chat, and I don't see any hands up. Mind you, you're covering part of the screen, so I won't be able to see them. But I do have a question. Like when you said an 8% increase, and our previous budget indicated 812,000. Now we're down to 805,000.
Like the reduced assessment, maybe?
Could have been.
So
I would have to look into that. I went and opened the 24 draft one, and the notes and the formula showed an 8%, but I would have to double check on.
but what you used is 8% from the 752,000 that's in the 2024 budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we have Director McFadden with a question. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm hearing someone's printer. Is there someone unmuted? Oh, now we're good. Okay, I just have 2 questions. One is, what is the change? You said there's an 8% increase now all the way through. So just curious as to what's the change in that extra 2%. And next question, so it's 8% every year going forward, as well as the projected tipping fee increases that we have seen previously?
This service has a very low taxation base, and it has very substantially increased borrowing repayment expenses that haven't been in this service. So when we get down a little further, I can demonstrate that. We haven't been building up reserves enough to meet our needs for capital expenditures. So we have a lot of borrowing occurring in the coming years. And I did revise some of the borrowing where appropriate to move to reserves. And so this is something we can talk about when we get to those stages. But I tried to use reserves as much as possible rather than borrowing, so that we don't have those the borrowing repayment costs, but without depleting the reserves, because we are not adding very much in this 5-year plan based on our overall expenses and revenues balance. So the increases are projected both for tipping fee and taxes to where this service is increasing in expenses.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I've got, do you need a supplemental on that, Director McFadden, or you're good?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, so Director Davidoff.
Yeah, so in a previous meeting, we had a conversation about the rate per thousand that West Waste was paying, which was around 10 cents a thousand, compared to what Central and East West were paying, which I think I heard before that was something like 30 or 35 cents a thousand. And so is this increase in taxation an effort to equalize, and will there be an offsetting decrease in Central and East's taxation because of the 8% across the board increase in our service and the increased tipping fees in our service? Through the chair.
Through the chair, the subregions have completely separate services and budgets currently. This is entirely increases to meet the needs of this service.
Supplemental, Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Okay, so could staff just share with us what's happening with Central and East's overall taxation increases, if any?
Through memory, I believe East has an 8% this year, and I think Central has a 5%. Everyone has a relatively similar increase.
If I may add to this, Director Davidoff, I think I caution to use only percentage because of the very different starting amounts for their services. So it is almost more valuable to use dollar differences versus percentages, because the current taxation in the West Sub-region is so low in comparison to East and Central that using a percentage for comparison deceives the actual picture of increases that we are suggesting. So, Chair, can I respond to the manager's comment?
Absolutely, go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, we may not like, I think your point has merit, but our constituents and our ratepayers look at percentages very seriously, and we get hammered with percentage increases all the time. And so I guess my real question here is that let's move the percentage issue off the table for a second. Is there anything in our increases that is going to help decrease the dollar amount of taxation in Central and or East? Through the chair.
Through the chair, the citizens efficiency study and some of what the workshop that Uli was just speaking about a few minutes ago will be discussing some options and considerations for more of a regionalization, but currently there's zero exchange between this, like whatever West does has no impact on the other subregions and vice versa.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I would like, if I may, Chair, point out, Amy has already mentioned that in answering the question about the main drivers for these increases are indeed our future capital expenses and creating reserves for them. The main borrowing occurring in the, or anticipated to occur in the years 2027 and 28, in a total of about $13 million. These expenses are very raw, very, very rough estimates. So they may very much change. There is the landfill closures that are really unknown, that we won't know until we have completed our assessment studies for these old landfills. So the $4 million is truly a placeholder. The $9 million around the Utashinya landfill development, I believe, is a lot more realistic, but there is still a component, and we are still trying to quantify that a bit more, a component that the central subregion will contribute to, right? They are user of the Utashinya landfill, and that component is still under development. So I just want to point out there is looseness to these future expenses, but I think it is prudent to work towards a reasonable reserve to be prepared for these expenses.
Thank you. Director Main, you've got a question, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have one question and then one unrelated comment. In line item 28, compost, is the Silverton New Denver Community Compost Program cost included in this, or is that a separate item?
Through the chair, that is in the grants expenses line, which is in the around the 200 somewhere. So we'll get to that. It is included in here though.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And my comment is, given that Silverton, among other jurisdictions, is facing an effective 18% increase in resource recovery for this taxation year, I think we need to be very mindful and proactive in developing a communications plan so that the people that we are servicing have some idea of why these costs have increased so much and so consistently, and why that continues. And I think that as a director, I would need some reference materials for communicating these things, rather than trying to explain to people this huge budget with which I struggle to understand myself. So I just want that noted in our discussions, that we must have a communications plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Main. Director David.
I'll refer to Director Jackman because I've already spoken. I'll speak after Director Jackman, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Director Jackman, go ahead.
Just thank you. I was going to try and help out Manager Wilson, because there are 213 lines in the East Resource budget. And what we did look at in December was the lift from 24 to 25. 2025 is 10%, followed by 7% lift in the next year. So we're on par. A lot of factors, as was stated, just things like borrowing costs, closure, our next phases of incremental closure at Creston Landfill. But we're in the order of a 10% lift. I didn't hear a lot of pushback from my colleagues in that conversation. The other point, I guess, is that the budget that you are looking at is actually the currently proposed 2025 is not 8% more, it is 7%, and then subsequent years are 8%. So I don't know, Amy, if there's an intention if 7 went in instead of 8 in the formula, but it is showing a 7% 2024 actual to 2025 proposed, the newly proposed. Previously proposed was an 8% lift.
Thank you, Director Jackman. And that was the question that I asked right at the beginning there. So anyways, Director David, go ahead.
Yeah, I have again, these are global questions about overall taxation in this service, and I know staff is working on asset management plans for all of our infrastructure. And the key thing is that has the asset, and I think I've asked this before, but I'm going to ask it again, has the asset management cost that staff is currently looking at for all of our infrastructure been factored into the 5-year budget? Or are we just looking at guesstimates for what we may need for upgrade, like for operational purposes, for upgrading and capital infrastructure, without the asset management component factored in? And basically, is there another shoe to drop here in terms of us looking at a substantial asset management plan cost being factored into the equation within the next 5 years? Through the chair.
Thank you, Director David.
If I may?
Yes, go ahead.
So the asset management planning for the overall organization, the overall RDCK is at the very early stages. We are just expecting the report from our consultant that then will be shared as part of the, as I understand it, the budget discussion in February with the board. We have no asset management plan at this point. This is only laying out a strategy to obtain one. What we do have is we have some inventories that have been done to lay the basis for an asset management plan. But having said that, your infrastructure in resource recovery is very much limited to your infrastructure at the recycling depots, at the transfer stations, and the landfill. You have significant investments for the landfill identified in this budget. Your transfer stations, 3 of them, which is almost all you have, 3 of them have been just completely renewed. So we are at a good starting point. And the recycling inventory is relatively minor in comparison. So there is no huge asset gap to be expected for the Western Subregion in regards to asset management planning going forward. Yes, we will have identified contributions to reserve funds that asset management plan is completed. That gets us ready for future replacement of these transfer stations. We will continue to identify landfill expenses, but with the exception of the entrance area and the scale, these are not really assets that we replace. We are creating new assets in form of landfill space in the future, or expenses of assets that we don't have, like a landfill gas collection or closure works. The closure works, again, are anticipated to be recovered through the landfill liability reserve contributions that we make on an annual basis. So you are in a good place in that regard as well. So while we have not done an asset management plan yet, I don't anticipate major impacts beyond what you see, at least for the next 5 years, in these budgets going forward as we develop these asset management plans.
Supplemental.
David, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, supplemental, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so did I hear, through the chair, did I hear the manager say that we are going to be receiving a draft asset management plan in February, or?
If I may, what we are going to receive is the report from the consultant that lays out the steps going forward in regards to creating an asset management plan. It will lay out and identify resources required, i.e. staffing. It will speak to suitable software solutions that will assist us in creating these asset management plans, and generally lay out likely a work plan to complete these asset management plans.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to ask that question. Just clarified it. Thank you.
Okay, it was a legit concern as far as asset management planning. Will that have an impact on our 2025 budget and going forward for the next 5 years? And from what I hear, the answer is yes, it will, but it won't be that great. Anyways, we'll continue on. Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. The sale of service, our tipping fees are all noted here. All the subregions budgets were drafted with that 10% tipping fee increase that we informed municipalities and contractors of in the fall. And that's a 10% across the board. That report is for the bylaw amendment is coming to joint next week, so we can have further discussion about it there. But if we do not have the tipping fee increase, there would need to be a much more substantial taxation increase. On line 16, the Udashenia facility, sorry, before I go there, I'll point out that all three subregions were actually under the budget value for this year. So we had this year happened to have less waste coming to our sites, and it was a pretty common trend. There are a few sites where we got more than projected or more than budgeted, and others where we got under. So it seemed to be an odd year for development, possibly. I'm not entirely certain. However, on line 16 for the Udashenia, I will note that there is a very sizable increase based on, we're estimating about 600,000 in soils have come from an RDKB project. They're doing a project on a wastewater treatment plant. So that, if you're wondering why 24 was fairly large and then it's decreased in 2025, it's because we're not projecting that 600,000 to repeat. So it's an explanation as to why that dropped down in 25. And also I'll point out here, and we'll discuss it a bit more in the A120 service, but all of the compost revenues were lower than budgeted. And that's largely due to the lack of ICI participation, and that's very much a focus of our staff's time this coming year. With the potential for, and you'll hear about this next week, for a pilot for an ICI collection from one of our contractors, which they previously weren't interested in providing. So that's great news for some potential headway on that. Any questions on tipping fees before we move ahead?
I don't see anybody in chat, and I can't see hands because the screen is blocked with the presentation. So directors, if you want to be recognized, please post it in chat. I'm monitoring chat. Go ahead, Amy.
Okay. So not much change in the user fees. The first one on line 23 is for our scrap metal rebates, and that's a varies year to year, and I use about a 5-year average to estimate that. Line 25 is the rebate we get from the major appliance stewardship program, and again, that's one that's averaged over a few different years. Grants, for the most part, the line 27 was for the Growing Communities Fund, so we won't have any of those to come. That was received in 23, so that line will be removed. But the other one was in regards to the OICP grant, and so 24 is majority of the funds that we'll see from that will be completed, and that's to support Castlegar with their curbside. I believe that those funds will be accrued in 24. There's a chance if it doesn't go out, it might have to roll into 25. And then we just have a little bit remaining for 25. And that also had a higher budget in that when we were, if we were going to move to the rural curbside, but that is not proceeding. So anything related to that rural curbside related to the referendum has been removed from the budget.
So I do have a question from Director Davidoff. Go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, Jared, sorry about that. I was just fumbling. I'm trying new glasses out and trying to multitask at the same time, so I apologize for the delay. Just when staff mentioned the comment about our projected revenues from composting, I mean, that revenue is really important to support our composting initiatives, and we're going to get more information on that. But is the trend in other jurisdictions? Has staff looked into the trend in other jurisdictions with respect to what's happening with their composting revenues over time? Perhaps other jurisdictions that have been operating composting facilities before we started ours. Like, is there kind of a trend that staff is aware of, or has staff ever looked into that through the chair?
Through the chair, our consultants did share when we launched into this program that a lot of programs take multiple years to get onboarded. And I think that they actually suggested that we consider about 50% in the first couple of years and then move up to 75. And then they actually suggested that I think 95 is kind of where you can cap out. So because we do not have much, if any, ICI, the only ICI participation would be any companies or businesses that haul to the Cheniere and drop off on their own. So because we don't have that, the ICI was a fairly large component of the percentage that we were accepting. So the actual curbside programs are doing quite well. The Castlegar program is doing great, and we get good volumes, and we've seen great improvements in contamination. I think it's just a natural progression of a new program. We're really only a year or so into it at this point.
Can I ask the director for clarification? When the director asked about the revenue, was that focused on the disposal revenue or revenue of sales of compost?
I think, to the chair, I was more concerned about the revenue from receiving compost, not sales of compost. And the thing is that I was interested in the comparisons with other jurisdictions that have kind of commenced composting operations. Would it be fair, Chair, supplemental, and then I'll stop?
Yes, go ahead.
Would it be fair to ask through the chair if staff could answer that to really understand what our revenues and from receipt and sale of compost probably will take the full 4 or 5 years to understand and to have some kind of certainty in terms of continuity? Would that be a fair question to ask staff through the chair?
Sorry, I'm not clear on the question.
Maybe I give it a try. Through the chair, the continuity question. So right now we have City of Castlegar as the main provider internally for these food waste disposal and composting. We are working diligently on an ICI program, currently a bit more targeted towards Nelson, but it would expand into all the other municipalities, Castlegar and Creston, the same way, in order to foster a collection program for the ICI sector. So that's the piece that is undeveloped. There's as well a lot of uncertainty around the volumes coming from the City of Nelson residential program. So that's the two unknown that we are working on. Over and above we are going to, hopefully by spring this year, start a pilot for the biosolids composting piece. If successful, that would be a significant addition to the volumes being processed, and with it, the tipping fee revenue coming from that part. So it's in development, many unknowns there. The fixed amount that we don't think will significantly change is the materials received from the city of Castlegar and obviously the Kootenay boundary region, and the other three components are under development.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think probably we'll be addressing that a little bit more in detail on 8-120. Yes, I see nodded. So we'll continue on.
Okay. So moving into proceeds from borrowing, we have the Nakusp transfer station construction and the Slocan transfer station in 2024. Obviously on line 34, the compost curbside, that didn't proceed. One thing I'll note on line 32, there was a note, or sorry, where I have highlighted in yellow there in the comments section. I had in there in the version that was emailed out, that was the landfill closure reserve. It actually wasn't. We changed it to coming from regular reserves, but I mistakenly didn't change the note there. So just this highlighted yellow, just so I remember to point that out to anyone. So there was no change in the values. It was just a note I neglected to update after it was changed. So as we mentioned, we have a significant amount of borrowing in later in the plan period. There is like some of those are placeholders, and when we get to the more conceptual and design phases, then we'll be able to refine those numbers. And those values were all included in our resource recovery plan, so they're available for long-term borrowing. So moving into transfer from reserves, the first line is the values that we remove from our regular reserves, and there are a variety of projects. Then we, on line 42, we have a placeholder there for the landfill closure reserve. We'll get into a bit more detail about what that is. It's a new thing for this year. Line 43 is growing communities funds, and we're using up all of that grant. So that grant came to the service last year. It was put into reserve, and we're using the full amount for the transfer station upgrades. And then on the last line for the transfer from reserves on 44, that's our stabilization reserve. And we actually had been planning to use $220,000 in 2025 to help balance out and reduce the taxation increase. I did remove that. And then we're using a portion of it in 2028. That $780,000 is actually for the Nakusp, the value equivalent to the cost for the Nakusp compost facility. So that project is still very preliminary. It is in the resource recovery plan. But rather than add financing cost to the service, we have a fairly healthy stabilization reserve. So I put it there as a placeholder for now. And when we get closer, we can determine if we use those funds for something else, then we could, it is noted for capital works and long-term borrowing in the resource recovery plan, but just to reduce repayment costs, it's earmarked for a stabilization reserve. Any questions?
I do have a question here. Let me just take a look. Dr. Davidoff.
Yeah, I'll defer to other people to go ahead of me, Chair, because I don't want to monopolize the questions.
Well, I'm looking at chat, and I see your name in chat. I don't see anybody above you. Director Jackman, I believe, has already asked this question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just have a question about where the city of Castlegar is at with, with septage. I mean, I know they're looking at their plans. At one point, we were pretty close to making some kind of deal. about utilizing their services. So I don't know if staff can answer that, or maybe Director McFadden can answer that as to where is Castlegar at, and are we part of that conversation? Are we part of that equation to participate in joint septage services, collection services, or reception services in the future? Through the chair.
Yeah, and thank you, Director Dado. But before we get an answer, are we getting ahead of ourselves, or are we going to be discussing septage later on?
Don't know about septage specifically much as part of the budget discussions.
On line 48, there is a note there from the transfer from the septage service. So I think that's what triggered the question.
Okay, go ahead.
And Director McFadden, if you want to comment, please feel free. But generally speaking, yes, staff is part of the liquid waste management plan that the City of Castlegar is conducting. As previously pointed out, that is ultimately a anticipated 3-year process, so there is no short-term results from that to be expected. Our staff is part of the discussion, provide the required information in regards to septage volumes and any opportunities to work together, as well as any discussions in regards to future biosolids management. So yes, that cooperation is working closely, but there's no short-term results to be expected.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair.
go ahead, Ian.
Okay. So transfer from other services, line 46 is the value that the West receives from the central subregion in regards to landfill operations, and that was that calculation that Chair Popoff was mentioning. So as there's a policy in regards to that guides the considerations there, and we do an annual calculation based on costs and tonnages. You can see that it's starting to decrease, and that is reflective of the expectation that there'll be less garbage coming for landfilling, and instead if that organics portion of the yard garbage would be headed to the compost facility. So we do expect central to be less of a portion of the tonnage going into the landfill. And then I'll wrap it up with the prior year surplus. So, and likely we'll have, step in here if need be, but essentially the prior year surplus for the end of 2023 coming into 24, we, because of new accounting standards and some delays with the audit, we didn't receive that until around Q3 or even later. So, the values that you can see, so on line 54, that would be the sort of the operating surplus or deficit. What you see on line 55 is a lump sum that was brought into the service that reflects our landfill closure. And so we were calling it landfill liability. It's not a landfill liability. It's funds that are coming into the service and being that are associated with this service, that are coming into the service, that are being directly transferred into a landfill closure reserve. And you'll see that when we get into the reserves. So that money is coming in and going out, but going out to a West Waste landfill closure reserve. So those are just a flow through for this year into a reserve. And then on line 56, what that is the portion of the operating surplus that we actually know we have earmarked work that those funds in 23 were for, and then get transferred into 24. So about 66,000. You can see in 2025, there's 554,000. And so what that is funds from 24 that were for work in 24 that's being carried into 25. So for the most part, it is the around 100 or 110,000 for the design operation closure plan at Udashenia. And as well, it is for the compactors that have yet to be installed at the 3 transfer station projects. So that 554,000 is getting carried into 25 to complete those works that were intended to be in 24. And the reason why they're separated is because the 274,000 that you see on line 54, that's our operating surplus, and that any operating surplus from the prior year gets split in half, and half of that remains in the service and half of that goes into the stabilization reserve. So that's why I've pulled out those values in line 56, so that those values don't get halved as well. So those funds are there for the work that gets carried over. And that's it for the revenues. Any questions before we move into expenses?
Okay, I don't see anything in chat, so go ahead.
Okay, so for salaries, one change that we're making this year, so this is line 64, that's the waste spotters. We are actually making a change early in the year here to change the waste spotter shifts to actually be landfill attendant shifts. It'll be a really big advantage to us operationally because with the collective agreement, the landfill attendants are required to have breaks, and other than closing the site for 15 minutes, which we understand would be pretty operationally challenging, or having double people for every shift. At the sites that are busier, that don't have the opportunity to have a break in between customers, so for example, Udashenia and Nakusp is generally where we would have a waste spotter. We're now having the waste spotters become the same position as the landfill attendants, so they can interchange. They can't now because the landfill attendants are a union position, and so the waste spotters can't come in and collect cash and use the computers, and there's a few differences with their jobs. So now that we make them all the same, they can interchange, so they can sub each other out and make breaks. So that's why we're halting the budget on line 64, and that's getting absorbed in the budget on line 66. The one place where most places this is a cost savings to us. The one place that there is a bit of a difference is at Udashenia, and that's because there was a bit of an overlap between the recycling educator and the waste spotter that can't occur now because they will be different shifts. So there is, I think there was maybe a $10,000 difference for Udashenia, but for the remainder of the locations, it's a cost savings. So and overall, it's a cost savings for the West Sub-region. And also there is some negotiations on our collective agreement. So we do expect to have some outstanding back payment, and so there's a lump sum of that expected to be accrued to 2024. It hasn't occurred yet, but it is budgeted there. So moving ahead, not significant change to their salary related or staffing related costs. They generally have a 3.3% increase for 2025. Again, not a significant change to directors and travel costs. In the West Sub-region, we actually there's a few line items in these accounts for the lead hand. Our lead hand was actually on leave for better part of a quarter this year, so we're under budget on a lot of those line items because we had those tasks filled by other roles. So the values for 24 are less than budgeted, and we've gone back to sort of what we expect based on schedules. But otherwise, there's not a significant change from the year in this one.
If I may add to, we have as well an expired union contract, so that is post actual expiry being negotiated back to end of March of 2024. So you see a potential outcome from these negotiations that are not in this budget at this point.
So if there is an increase, we will be taking money out of the reserves then to compensate that?
We likely will reallocate something still in this process. So the next version that you will see will likely see a cost in some form added to the 2024 budget. But it's not a huge amount going to be, but we will see some increases in comparison to this version to these salary items.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so some of the things, one thing I am going to note, and I haven't gone and changed yet, but this came up as discussion. We did discuss it at East, and it seemed that there was agreement there. Is some expenses, so directors is an example, where we have split the cost between the main waste service and the allocation services. So right now, 70% of the director's cost lands in the waste service. 20% goes to recycling and 10% goes to composting. Staff has recommended to me that we adjust the compost down to 5% as we have sort of dropped the amount of time that we were very heavily into the compost discussions for the last few years. And now that we're into operations, we're bringing it to you a little bit less. So there is a recommendation from my staff to change that from 5% to compost and then 75% to waste. I haven't made those adjustments yet, and whether I think like if everyone agrees to it, then we can make those adjustments in the final version. I don't know if anybody has comments or questions on that.
And I'm looking at chat, so I don't see any comments or questions on that, so it appears it's a go.
It doesn't make an increase in cost to the service. It's just where it's allocated. Make some adjustments. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on the next few accounts. They're fairly low. There were a couple of accounts in here where like the placeholder value was higher than we were normally spending. An example here is advertising on 102. So it's been at 2,000 for quite some time, and we generally don't meet that. So I dropped them by closer to what our actuals are. So they might need to go back up in future years, but and I think that there was some increased in line 101 to help with the Nakusp advertising for closure, just so that we could engage with the community. If there's any lines that we're passing that people have questions on, please feel free to ask. As I mentioned, so line 118, that's 100,000 for the design, operation, and closure plan. That work has been deferred into 25, and we've added 10,000 for the archaeological assessment that we have started to undertake. So contracted services, so Nakusp, I mean, hasn't changed much from discussions in the past, but Nakusp operations and maintenance for 2025, we don't yet know the closure date. So I have just left it at the full year. And right now we're on a month-to-month extension with the contractor until the landfill closure, and then afterwards it would move into a site operations contract like we have at most of our larger transfer stations. So we may not need that whole value, and that's the 60,000 is what we're projecting for future years. And then you can see that I do have a small amount for hauling for when we do start to move waste from Nakusp down to Deshenia, but it wouldn't be a significant portion of the year, and then you can see that it moves into full year hauling, and we will be issuing that RFP in probably in Q1 here for that. We did a 1-year extension for waste or GFL to do the hauling, and then once the landfill's closed, we'll have all 3 transfer stations on the same contract.
So just before you continue with the Nakusp landfill closure, is we will be taking more waste into Otishane, and that probably would affect our formula with Central.
No.
Nope.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
Yeah, it's based on the percentages of tonnage you received at each landfill site. So has that been looked at as far as the continuing budget beyond 2025?
You see, if I may, through the chair, you see actually a much larger effect from things like the soil acceptance that you saw, right? It's the acceptance at the cusp, total acceptance, I believe, is around 2,000 tons right now. Is that all disposed, or is that that's
I think
including?
that's landfill.
That's landfill. So that would be somewhere in the 10% range of Utashinia. So yes, you will see a shift, but not a massive shift. It will overall become more effective. So we will see a positive financial impact, small positive is a financial impact on both services.
Okay, great, thank you.
Chair.
Oh, okay, I see you. Yeah. I see you in chat, Director David. Do you have a question?
Yes, on line 121. So I see, my question through the chair is I see the budgets for 2026 to 2029 ranging in the $60,000 range. Staff has just commented that depending on how long the contract takes, the month-to-month portion, we've budgeted $231,000, and our previous 2025 budget was 116. So if we effect a saving of even say $100,000, where would that money then go? Would it just be a reduction in expenses, or that would be unspent money and just a reduction in expenses? Is that what staff is proposing?
Yes, through the chair, the 116 in 2025 was assuming we would have closure at some point through 2025 or earlier in 25. So it wasn't expecting a full year of operation. So that's why, so if you look in the columns for 2024, you'll see that we're essentially basing the 2025 value off of that. Whereas when we did this budget a year ago, we were expecting to have the landfill closed a little sooner. So that's why there's the difference there. So any money that is not spent on the landfill operations contract would be just less expenses and would end up becoming a surplus in going into 25. So any portion of it would remain in service and would offset expenses in 26. And part of it, half of it would go to the stabilization reserve.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So there's not a significant amount of changes, and these generally we did update all of the environmental monitoring line items based on, you'll be getting the environmental monitoring program report at Joint next week. We're awarding that, looking to award that contract. So we did update those values with the pricing that we got from that procurement. So some of those have been changed in previous year, but a lot of the other ones are simply based off previous years and with a CPI inflator, 3%, and some of them were a little bit higher. It depends if the contract was up for renewal or not. As an example, the landfill operations contract for Utashinia will be up in 2026. So 2026 has an increase because of that contract change, as well as an increase for the volumes to manage the Nakusp materials. So you can that one has more of an increase. The majority of the other ones are pretty consistent. When we get down to, so on line 139, I was wrong, it's not 200, it's Director Main. So 139 is, oh, sorry, that's not the right one. Oh, so previously in the contracted services is where we had the support for the Healthy Community Society for the Compost in New Denver and Silverton. We have moved that down to grants, actually, so maybe it is closer to 200. We haven't got there yet. Line line 139 is the CCAS cost, and we have increased it by 30% with the assumption that we'll be doing more mechanical and manual treatments as opposed to herbicides. We get into the Eco Depot. So this is expecting that we would be able to launch an Eco Depot partway through the year in 25 in Castlegar. And then we would also onboard one in the cusp in 2026. We're still trying hard to establish that in Creston. And so that one is where we're focusing to start, and then using that template to move into Castlegar and Nakusp. So we have hopes that will occur, but we haven't had great success in Castlegar or in Creston, but there could be different contractors available in the West. So essentially what that is a budget that would either be used for an Eco Depot as in 140, or in line 142 is the value for the hazardous waste events. So currently, the hazardous waste events, that is budgeting for the 3 events, Castlegar, Nakusp, and Silverton. And then assuming that we have the Eco Depots in place, then we would drop down to only an event in Silverton following 26 and on.
So before you move on, I got a question since you mentioned Creston and I attended that meeting or whatever. Our Eco Depots in Castlegar and possible on the cusp are not dependent on Creston, are they?
No.
Okay.
No, it's just staff time to do the work. But now that we've developed a template for the procurement, I don't know that I think that we'll still within these timelines.
So I've got a question from Director McFadden. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff. So you're talking about Eco Depot starting in what year in Castlegar? I actually just had this question not too long ago.
Earliest start was late 2025 is what the note says. I can't recall how I did the formula for that one, but it's assuming sort of in a late Q2, maybe Q3.
Okay.
We haven't issued the procurement yet, so it'll be a mid to late year, I'm assuming, actually.
And supplemental, that's okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. And that would be similar to what we have for the Nelson Leafs, like you're looking at a third party to partner with?
Our ideal scenario would be a third party. I mean, we are possibly even considering if that, like in Creston, where we're not having a lot of success, is whether or not we want to consider it, depending on success of finding a contractor, if that's something we want to propose bringing in-house. And that's not our ideal situation. It'd be great. These things work really well with a bottle depot. Because that's something that brings in other revenues from like somebody just doing this off of the stewardship returns on other materials. You generally need to have as many stewardship programs as you possibly can to make something like this work, so that your staff can work on all of the different materials. And so our ideal situation would be a contractor, likely someone with a bottle depot.
Great, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so repairs and maintenance, these are generally placeholders based on previous years or known items. So line 145, we've got some repairs on our grizzly plates that are deferred into 25, and then it goes back down to more of a regular value. And I think there was also on line 152 some funds for Fire Smart recommendations that we'd like to action in 25. And then it goes back down to more regular values. Operating supplies are not that different. The equipment on 65 or 165 and 166 for the most part are just deferred, so we haven't yet moved the plate readers for our new scales software, not so new anymore, are being piloted in Roman first, and so we expect those to roll out to the other scaled sites in 25. Utilities and rentals are no significant change. So line 176, so provisions, this is the line where we we previously had funds leave the service that were based on a calculation for our landfill liability. And that those provision values, those funds are, I'll let, just clarify this if I don't get it across, but it's a non-cash transaction. So that money goes into our system, but it didn't previously go into a reserve where we could see like a bank account where we could see it get accumulated. It was out there, but it was like a little bit out in the cloud to us as staff, and it, made sense to the auditors, but not so much to us. So what this new accounting standard is great is that now that money is going into a reserve, like our regular reserve and our stabilization reserve. We now have those funds going somewhere where we can see that balance. And so we are halting the practice of the expenses leaving the service through that provisions line. And so I've highlighted the comment in there because I don't recall. I think actually what I changed was it was landfill liability and it's supposed to be called landfill closure. So I think that was a simple change there. And so now you'll see that that value leave the service on a reserve transfer line coming up here. And that value is calculated every year based on our tonnages and where we're at in closures and finance, and us have a calculation tool that helps model that based on where we're at in the landfill development based on closure. And essentially what it is assisting to fund the eventual closure of the landfill.
So I do have a question from Director Davidoff. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I lost my phone there for a second. Sorry about that. Question on line 198. If we're there now, if I missed something or not, that's okay. We're not. Yeah, I didn't I don't know if we're there yet because I had to go grab my phone. Sorry.
Stabilization.
It's okay. We haven't gone through the debenture yet, but we can jump to this if you'd like, or you can just wait a moment and we'll be there.
No, I'll just wait till we get there. Thanks, Chair. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So the next set of accounts are our borrowing repayment. So the first set is all the interest and the second set is all the principal payments. And what you can see is that, especially starting in 27, you can see on line 186 where it's a subtotal there, we jump from around 80,000 up to 200 and then up to 420, and that's just on our interest. And then if we're down on line 195, we're in the 44,000 range, and we jump into the 120 and then up into the 235 range. So like both together, like this is where we're going to start seeing this is what we need those increases for, is to finance this repayment, because that's a substantial amount of money. It's essentially what we're combined. It's what we're funding through our taxes right now. So one of the things I did change from last year's budget is this. So line 181 and line 190. That was the Nakusp landfill closure was intended to be funded by long-term borrowing. We have enough in reserve, so that was removed. So in the interest, it was just under 50,000 a year removed, and in the principal, it was just under 30,000. So all combined, it is almost an $80,000 reduction in our annual payment, and that would have been over 25 years. So that's why it's important to have reserves. And so as we get closer to getting more finite values for the projects that we have in 27 through 29, we'll be in a better position to see, if any of this other borrowing can be moved to reserve funded instead of through borrowing. So we're moving into the contribution to reserve. So I'll just go through this quickly, Director Davidoff, and then we can go to your question. So on line 196, that's our contribution to regular reserves. We've generally done fairly well in our reserve contribution, which has been helpful. But as you can see in 25, it's not a bad value. But you can see, like in the later years in 27 through 29, we're really getting down into the nitty gritty. And what I'm hoping is that some of the projects that we've earmarked with our best budget estimates at present time, hopefully we'll be able to reduce some of those capital costs, reduce some of the borrowing costs, and be able to instead to improve those, because that's not for the size of the service. Stuff that's under $100,000, that's kind of laughable, really. We need to be putting more money into reserves, but I don't want to be jacking our tax increase to 15% in those years, because we really need to get a little bit more refined in those costs and whether or not we can fund them different ways or have them be lower cost. So I'm not concerned about it at present, but I think it's something to keep an eye on and make sure that we're not getting too low on our reserve transfers in the next few years.
So to line 198, I can probably guess what Director David's question is, but go ahead, Director David.
Well, just before we get there, I just want to wrap up. So 197. So this is you can see that $2.6 million that I mentioned was that landfill closure. So that was part of our prior year surplus that came in from 23 into 24. So that's the money that came in. And then that 2.6 is moving into that landfill closure reserve. And then on future years, so the 399 that was in that provisions line, that's what you can see is that moved into that 450. And we did increase it sort of based on some estimates on where we think that'll land. So we increased it from the just under 400,000 to 450 in future years, but that's where that provisions transfer has moved. And then finally on 198, so that's the contribution to stabilization reserve. So that's just based on it's half of whatever the prior year surplus is. That is the operating surplus. That's not earmarked for works that carried into 25. So that's it for the contribution to reserves. And
go ahead, Director David, if you had your question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And you'll owe me a fireball if it's different from what you're thinking, okay? So bottom line is that now every time we look at budgets, every time we look at contribution to stabilization reserves or things like that, what happens is that we are kind of working. Are we working from really solid numbers now at the beginning of January, or is there still a lot more adjustments to the budget to be made and additional data that we need to input in all of these line items? Like, how close are we to a final financial picture for last year? Through the chair.
Through the chair, we had, so the projected year-end values were based on Q3 for most things projected to the end of the year. There were a number of things that we knew were coming, so I added those if there were values that sort of were not repeat monthly charges, but still pending or expected to be accrued into 24. We've tried our best to project to the end of the year. The sales of service were actually done, I think, mid-December. So some of the things that we've gone back in and updated them based on sort of the current data at the time of finishing the budgets, including salaries. So some of them are, I guess the point being is I think we're fairly close, but it is really hard to say exactly where that projected year-end amount is. So if the prior year surplus is less, then that 137 into the stabilization reserves would be dropped. And you can see that actually happened on line 188. So the budgeted amount for the stabilization reserve was only 95,000, but our surplus was actually, a prior year surplus was actually more than expected. So fine, because there's a board resolution to put half of it into the stabilization reserve, that's the 262 is what that value was at. So there could be some adjustment, but we've done our best to get it as close as what we expect to year end.
Okay, supplemental, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's usually, that's the reason I'm asking is that, what amount are we looking at that we can have some discretion in placing in the stabilization reserve or whatever. So, when, again, Chair, question to staff through the chair, when the staff anticipated actually having rock solid numbers? Is that beginning of February, or when will we have those? Through the chair.
Finance can step in here if they'd like. I think they cut off mid-January for anything to be accrued back into 24. So I suspect sort of near the end of the month or early February is when we'll have all the year-end completed.
Oh, there's Jeff. Okay.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. It's something that we don't have a rock solid date, but it'll
Chair,
be some beginning of February, from what I understand.
Yev has his hand up. He was going to answer that.
Who had his hand up?
Yeah.
Mal.
Through the chair, so as we get further into the following months, our numbers will change. Hopefully not as drastically. So we go through a year-end process, review all the accounts, do additional accruals. The numbers officially are not what you would call rock solid until the audit is complete and the board approves the audit. So that's, there could be adjustments even beyond when the budget is approved. But by the time the final draft is put in front of the board in March, we should have a very high degree of confidence in those numbers.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. More questions? Let's go.
So line 200, oh my, look at that guess. So on line 200, grants is the funds that we share or pass out to the New Denver Silverton Compost Program, the Healthy Community Society of North Slocan Valley. In 24, we gave them a larger value because they were developing a curing area. We actually just last night received a report, so we'll bring it to the joint meeting next week so that we can share how that program's going, and it's coming along quite well. We're glad to support it as staff. We have always for the last number of years had that 7,800 as an ongoing annual support, and the report that we'll have next week has that itemized. They are also looking this year to add another Joracan that would be an additional 1,750. So as you can see, I've got it highlighted because I have adjusted it, and with an increase from transfer from reserve, so there's no impact to taxes. That's one change I did make just this morning, so it's not in the version that you have. Any questions on that?
Yeah, it's actually, there's one included in this one. There would be a second one potentially that we are discussing, right?
That's correct, yes. So they had enough funds left over to purchase one, and they would like up to two. And so this would be allowing them to purchase two to expand the program. Good. Line 201 is the remaining funds to move to Castlegar for their curbside program from the YCP grant. Moving into transfer to other services, line 203 is for project management support. 204 is a transfer that the West and the East has a similar one where we transfer some funds to support the Nelson Leafs Eco Depot. We've done a survey at the Leafs to determine that there are users from both the West and East subregions that use that facility. So that's just contributing to that estimated portion of the costs. You can see it drops off in 26 because by then we do hope that if Castlegar has a depot that we would not need to continue that practice. Line 205 is the A102 service, which is the resource recovery service, which is my group of staff. And we split that similar to the directors and others where 70% remains in the waste service here, 20% in the recycling service, and 10% in the compost service. Line 206 is the transfer of tipping fees to the compost service. The budgets in 2024 in this service had so this is line 206. It had 100,000. However, the compost service was expecting 131,000. So that was a deficit on that service. So the 2025 value is actually about 250,000 with that 131 carried in to offset the value the service was expecting last year. That was an error. So that's a correction for this year. So that would be 250. And you can see, and then the line below it on 207 is a 50-50 split between Central and West in the remaining revenues that service needs. And so that's a tax subsidy. And so you can see that that decreases over time as the service gets more established and has more tipping fee revenue to support it. And they both drop off in about 2028 because that's when the short-term financing for that service drops off. So the overall cost of that service does decrease quite a bit once that 5-year borrowing drops off. 208.
Yes, go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, just on 206, I just want to understand. So staff mentioned that there was an error in the projected revenues or tipping fees, correct? In A120. So what was the error amount? I could do the math, but could staff please share with us exactly what the error was?
So on line 206 in the 24 budget, it was 100,000 in this service as what was leaving the service to go into the compost service. However, for that equivalent revenue line for the compost service, it was expecting 131,000. So the compost service was expecting 31,000 more in 24 from West. And so that deficit was carried over in the A120, and I'll describe it when we move into that compost service. So rather than do a financial plan amendment and adjust that in 24, we're just carrying over essentially that deficit from the compost service, and we'll have to offset that in 25. So it was a $31,000 difference.
Okay, supplemental
Go ahead,
chair.
Director David.
Yeah, so basically then you've got a $31,000 difference, plus then the base amount for 2025 has to be different, correct?
The base amount was calculated based on what was needed in 25 for the compost service. That was calculated separately, and that value is 250,000.
Yeah,
and then the 31,000 that was missing from 24 was added to it.
That's what I figured. It was 250. Matt was right, so that's good. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so line 208 is the value that West transfers to Central to fund the transport of compost from Lucian into the compost facility. We expect it to be sizably more than we were budgeting. We have purchased or in the process of purchasing a roll-off trailer to make hauling more efficient. But at present, even that 80,000 is where we expect we're going to land. Then 209 is the value that West transfers to the recycling allocation service, A118 for the compost service. The new Recycle BC incentives have decreased that by 140,000 for the West service, which is great. Not all the way we would like it to go, but it did make a dent in that. The next few lines are the transfers on 211 is the transfer to general admin, 213 is to IT, and there's a new licensing system there, and that's some services actually saw a significant change. Line 215 is the transfer to environmental services. And that one is split 10% or 80% to the waste and 10% to recycling and 10% to compost. And then we're moving into capital. Any questions before we move into the capital expenses?
I've decided my CEO chat. Hang on a sec here.
Chair, I'm sorry, I have to leave for a 2:45 appointment that I can't miss, so I will have to leave the meeting now. I apologize for that.
Okay, get over Dr. Davidoff. We will miss you. Anyways, before we go into capital, a bio break, are we ready for that? So why don't we take I don't know, about 6 or 7 minute bio break until 2:45.
and we are unmuted.
Okay, directors, welcome back, and we'll continue on our capital expenditures. Go ahead, Amy.
No one's screen's on, I don't know if it's there anymore. All right, so we got to capital expenditures. 217 is the Nakusp. So basically all the transfer station projects are virtually completed. The remaining item is some as-built and the installation and payment of the compactors. So those values transferred over for all three of those projects. Good news so far is that the projects look like they're coming in slightly under budget, and all of the and no deficiencies to speak of. So that's great. We're really happy with the project. So the compactors should be operational. In fact, they were supposed to be delivered at the end of the year and get installed in the next few weeks here. So the land 218 is the landfill closure. So we're in the process of doing the closure plan. So that'll get completed this year, and then we'll do some of the tendering preparation and maybe even the tendering, and then the actual construction the closure construction will occur in 2026. And that 1.4 is a value updated based on the draft closure plan that we just received from the consultants. Line 219 is a placeholder for a compost facility. A compost facility in Nakusp really would need the participation and the volumes that would come from the Nakusp community. So this is something that's an aim of ours, but it does need to go hand in hand with discussions and participation from the municipality. The shelter, we'll remove that one because we completed that project. So 221, that is for a tipping area relocation and a second scale, so an outbound scale to improve traffic at our regional landfill. With the plan to do the design in 25 and the construction in 26. Ideally, we have the DOCP, the design and operation closure plan for Deshenia, at least in draft, to ensure that we're the area that we're looking to move the tipping area is the long-term location we want it. And currently we have these smaller bins that the loader carries, and the new transfer station might be retrofitted to fit more of the roll-off bins like we have at all our other sites. So there'll be a lot of considerations on sizing and location for that. The curbside program on 222 is removed. That is not proceeding, the rural portion anyways. There was some gate modifications to occur on the compost. So there's a 10,000 carryover from on line 223. And on 224, the original authorization was to purchase 5 bins. For organics, we've only purchased 4. And so in 25, we expect to purchase the 5th bin. And that's split 50-50 with the Central Sub-region, because those organic bins just rotate from Groman, Central, and Udashenia, depending on the hauling frequency and routes. The line 225 is a pretty big item here. So the 2025 value is for the start of the detailed design for our optimized footprint. Some other works like ramp to Newcell in 26, we will ideally be moving the fence, but we do need our lands application to move forward so that we can place the fence in our final footprint, outside our final footprint. And then what we have for 27 is largely the cell development, and then in 20 and the liner, and then in 28 would be the installation of the leachate collection system and treatment. Like we mentioned, those are our placeholders. How exactly that work will be staged, it might be over more years than that, and it could happen in those 2 phases.
Right. is probably worthwhile mentioning that this is really a fairly tight time frame for us in regards to remaining space at that site. Unfortunately, we couldn't do the site tour with the director, so it would have been a bit easier to explain on site what our limitations there are, but there's not something we can drag our feet on as soon as we have the authorizations for the land and the plans and design completed. We need to proceed with this right away. So it is a bit of a balancing act for us.
And through the chair, the archaeological assessments have been a portion of what's delayed things, because we can't really go forward on the lands application until we have that First Nations work completed. So that is underway, and we do hope to get really rolling on this in 2025.
Yeah, so just on your comment, Uli, is, you know, we intend to have a tour of that facility sometimes in the spring and whatever, and those expenses are coming out in future years, so we'll have a good idea of going forward.
Yes.
So line 226 is similar to the Nakusp transfer station, so that's the carryover of the compactor and the as-built. Lines 227 and 228 were actually all wrapped into line 229, and that project also has the compactor still to be installed, and the as-built and some clean-out work. Line 230 is a new item. It actually was previously up in the operating supplies, but it's a value enough that finance directed me to move it down to a capital. So that's 50,000 for a new litter fence for Udashenia. Line 223, the legacy landfill. So this previously was actually one line item, this one and the one below it. So we split it up so that the line 223 is all the assessment work. And then on line 232, that $4 million placeholder in 2028. So the assessment work is phased and will really depend, the scope of the work will depend on what we find. We expect to have that completed in 25 and 26. And then we've used $1 million per landfill as the placeholder for the closure works costs. That's that $4 million in 2028. And really, some sites might be very simple closures, and some sites might be substantial, and they could require groundwater monitoring well installations and various things. But until we get the works in line 231 completed, we don't really know what it would be like. The ministry, we have submitted the site closure, the intention to release ourselves of our permits at all these sites. And so now the ministry is engaged in this process, and they really wanted to see our closure plans this coming year, and we said we're not anywhere near ready for that. So they seem okay with our approach thus far, and these works were all included in our resource recovery plan as well. Line 233 is we purchased a couple of, I think we purchased 2 roll-off bins per sub-region in 24. With the change coming for Nakusp, we will be purchasing another 4 bins to make sure that we have adequate roll-offs to circulate through the system for the Nakusp transfer station. And then the line below it is actually just our rolling stock replacement for roll-off bins. Once we just have basically estimate having a bin replacement every year. So the line 235 is a monitoring well network expansion. So this is a recommendation from our 2024 hydrogeology study. I believe it's about 5 wells, if I recall correctly. We need an improved background well, and then there's a number of wells down gradient that we need to add. placeholder at 200,000. We do also need some wells installed at Central for both the compost and, below the septage and some piezometers for HV. So we're going to do our best to coordinate that work so that we can share the mold costs. So it could be a little less if we're able to do that. Tipping wall bins. So as I mentioned, we have some bins that we will be replacing in 25. I think we've done two new bins that we're going to replace. We did some repairs and they were not going to be quite enough for all of them. So two of the bins we're actually going to need to replace. And then we're expecting to need new bins once we move to the new tipping wall. So depending on when that gets action at that 40,000 on line 236, it might be 25 or 26, but if we're not quite there, we might roll that into 27, depending on that project. The next two lines are for the eco depots. 35,000 is just the placeholder that we have. That was what we contributed to the lease, and really theirs was to help get like a new lift jack and some storage and various things. Any contractor is going to have, they could have a totally different array of needs. So really that's just our best guess for a placeholder. That's reserve funded, and if we're actually able to award, and it's a different amount, we would include that as part of the award request. And then the washroom at Silcan, that was included with the transfer station upgrade, so that's been completed. So that's it for the expenses. As I mentioned, we, in the reserves section at the bottom here, we do, so line 252, our regular reserves, they're pretty healthy right now, but we use a very large portion of them in 25 and 26, and then we're down into the sort of 200, 300 range for the last few years of the plan. And that's what I was talking about. We're using it because it'd be better than adding a whole bunch of repayment charges, but we have to be careful not to completely deplete it. So I think we're going to have to really pay attention to this, through this year, and especially in 2026, and when we get some better costing for some of the bigger projects, how we want to roll that out. The landfill liability closure reserve, the landfill closure reserve is in the 3 million, and we can potentially use, so for example, I originally had this in the budget for the Nakusp closure, but the problem being if you use it, then you have to replace it to have it as sort of that value that we're looking for. So finance recommended we just use regular reserves for now. And then once we get our landfill closure costing updated with the new DOCP, then we could, if we have closure works for the cell that we're currently working on in Ucheni, we might be able to tap into that, and or just let it continue to accumulate for when we eventually have landfill closure. We may even be able to use it for some of the legacy landfill closure. I'm not sure. Again, anything we use in here, I understand we would have to have a plan in place to replace it. So then the last one on line 262, our stabilization reserve. So that to me is fairly healthy. And we could be looking to utilize that for some other expenses. I haven't, the only one I have in there is at 780,000 in 2028 for the Nakusp compost facility. We could see about using it for other capital projects and reduce borrowing. We could also use it to just bring funds into the service, and reduce taxes. But the concern with that is if we reduce the tax increase this year by using the stabilization reserves, the tax increase next year will seem like a larger jump because we can't reduce the value that we're basing it off of, and then so the 2026 increase might not be 8%, it might actually be 20% if we reduced their taxation for this year, because we still need that level of revenue, and if we do that too many years in a row, that's going to disappear. So you could direct me to reduce or to utilize those stabilization reserves more. I just want to counter that doing so we just have to be careful where that lands us in future years for taxes. It'll look like a bigger increase in future years, I guess. And then CGF at the bottom there on the last row, that's the growing communities funds, and that'll be depleted once we remove it for the funding the transfer station projects this year.
Okay, we're done. So, directors, we're done with this budget here. Is there any questions that somebody would have liked to ask that I did not acknowledge or anything else? I'm monitoring chat, so with the display on the screen, I can't see the hands that are being put up or whatever. So if you have a question, put it in chat. And if I don't acknowledge you in chat or whatever within 30 seconds or so, yeah, just holler out your question and we'll acknowledge it. So last call for questions on this budget. Okay. Then we'll move on to what is the next that we're looking at? Is it compost or
Recycling.
Okay, we're into recycling now.
Okay, so this one, as I mentioned, we have about 118% increase in the incentives from RBC. So that was a welcome increase. And then I guess so we do see a decrease in the need for subsidy from S188 to support the service, and we did end up with about a 70,000 prior year surplus. So that carried into this year as well. The salaries, I think the only thing here was that increase that I mentioned in regards to having the changes in the wastewater versus the LFA change. Because the reason why it impacts this service is because that wastewater role is the same as the recycling educator. So those two are interchangeable. And now the wastewater portion is going to be changing to a landfill attendant. And so the wastewater actually covered couple hours of every shift in the recycling depot. The wastewater was the shift. So there was a few hours in the day where the wastewater wasn't on the tipping wall and instead would supervise the recycling depot. So now that would have to be entirely covered by the recycling depot educator. But otherwise, there's not a lot of changes in majority of this budget. Actually is pretty consistent. There's a few things again that I decreased previous budgets where we just had a standing value that we weren't spending those funds, and so we dropped a couple of them. Then on line 34 as an example, advertising on 38 as an example. So where reasonable, we did try and reduce estimated expenses. The contracted services have gone down largely due to the reduced price in our ICI contract. That is good. And again, this service currently does reflect the Winlaw Depot. So that 33,000 will get reduced out of a number of different line items: the salaries, the rental, the contracted services. And those, so I'll reduce all those values in the budget here, and then what that'll do is reduce the transfer from S188. So that 33,000, unless directed otherwise, that 33,000, I would probably just add to our reserves in S188. If you would like something different, you can instruct me to reduce it from taxes, but it wouldn't, I don't know that it'd be enough to drop it a whole percent. So I think it's probably warranted to go into reserves is,
I'm kind of chuckling at it. Not even a 1%. So yeah, the reserves would be, but just a question on the closure of Winlaw. When would that happen? Do you have an estimate? What particular?
I'd have to check with the staffing and the lease agreement. I suspect we'll give a few months' notice. So maybe I'll have to talk with the county and the staff and about the most reasonable to do that closure. You know, we'll post notices and do that advertising. So I would expect late Q1 maybe for Windmill closure. Somewhere in that area. So it won't be a full 33,000 in 25.
Yeah.
It'll be prorated based on that.
That's understood. Okay.
Okay, I'm just moving along because a lot of these don't have a very significant change. Yeah, so there's not a lot of changes in the recycling service. I'll point out again, the contribution to reserve is still only in the 5,000 range. And what we did with the other services is we actually increased, because the other services had they borrowed to finance the infrastructure and site development for all their recycling depots. West did that all through reserves. So the other subregions, once the financing dropped off in around 2027, they actually increased their contribution to reserves in the later part of the years. And this budget doesn't currently have that. So I don't think is anything to be concerned about at the moment, but it might be something to consider. I think the asset management program will help us determine that. I mean, the only assets here are CCANs, and I think the lifespan of them are pretty hardy. So I don't know that, unless we want to be doing new depots, which that's kind of the opposite way of where we're going. I don't know that we have a lot of capital works planned for this project or for this service. So I think we're okay.
Okay.
Any questions on recycling?
So I don't see anybody in chat, but just I do have a question. With the closure of Winlaw, the impact would be on the Crescent Valley Depot, because most of the people, go south. They don't go back up north to Slocan or from the Winlaw area. And right now, without taking a look at it, we don't really know if there'll be an increase in hours in Crescent Valley. We're just leaving Crescent Valley in this budget the way it is.
Through the chair, yes. I mean, the Crescent Valley has quite a wide hours of operation compared to a lot of our other depots. They're open, I think, 5 or 6 days a week and full days. I did speak with Akane about that, and I mean, there's some, because it depends if people are purely just going to recycling and garbage. They might actually go to Slocan because it's closer to get to the Slocan transfer station than to Groman or Shemya. So they did expect that there would be a split of where people are going. And the staff, site staff and the field supervisors and Akane all felt that we would be able to manage the materials with the current infrastructure and hours and staffing, but it will be something we'll keep an eye on.
Okay, so we're going to track it to a certain degree.
I think particularly in regards to traffic and serviceability, right? I mean, yes, we free up the contractor to some degree, having to service one less depot, but at the same time, anytime you service bins, you disrupt during the operating hours the traffic flow. So we will keep a close eye on the traffic flow and impacts to the usability of the depot.
Yeah, and that would be my main concern, is the traffic flow.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So any questions on, we do have a question here on recycle.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Director Bureau.
Fuller, yeah. Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, I just was going to comment on your comment that most people would be traveling to South Slocan for their recycling. And I think that because we have the transfer station in Slocan, that you would be getting most of those Winlaw people will actually be coming up here. I already know of quite a few that come up just because we do have the ability to use the transfer station. So I guess the concern with that is would there be any changes to the removal of the bins, like how often they're going to be filled up, et cetera, and is there any extended costs in that or different staffing for those purposes?
Yeah, through the chair, we don't expect any different staffing, and the hauling would occur more frequently if needed. I mean, I don't think that the 10 visitors a day at Winlaw is going to completely offset one or the other. I think that the sites has enough capacity to manage it. I mean, those sites, the Winlaw is only a satellite depot as well, so people still had to go to one of the other depots a lot of the time to do the materials that we accept at the core depots anyways. Yeah, so there won't be, I don't see any additional costs to, we'll keep an eye on it, but I don't think that we'll need to increase staffing or hours at either of the sites.
Yeah, so, you know, I guess in response to my comment about people coming down, when I looked at it, I didn't factor in that Spokane was closed because of the construction.
Yes.
That's why everybody was coming down to the Crescent Valley Depot, and that's a good point, Director Bueller, that you brought up. So we're going to try to do the traffic study on, or look at the traffic at both the transfer station and Crescent Valley and see what the difference is. Okay, do you have a supplemental? Director Bueller, do you have a supplemental?
No, thanks.
Okay. So we're done then with the recycling, and now we're down into composting.
Okay, so this service is essentially a standalone allocation service that is equally supported by Central and West. The sales of service at the top there, that is entirely the materials accepted only at Central. So it doesn't include what comes in at Udishenia, because that's funnels through the West, and or comes in at Croman, because that's funneled through S187 Central. So this is purely the material that gets hauled directly to the transfer, the compost facility. For the most part, maybe even 100% of it is the material that we get from the RDKB. And similar to the other subregions, they're still a little lower than we were expected. But again, their program's coming along fairly well, and they also are doing some piloting with the same contractor to do ICI, and they've just started actually doing that in Fruitvale. So they started first in the RDKB. So we do hope to see those tipping fee revenues increase as they get their ICI customers onboarded as well. User fees, so that is, we had a fairly low amount, so on line 3, fairly low amount expected for finished compost. We actually did not get that screened in time before the season changed. So that's what we expect will be our future compost sales starting in 2025. On line 5, we had a small municipal insurance agency of BC risk management grant for some work we did at the compost facility. And the other funds is the remaining incoming funds from the first OIP grant. So that was the one that funded the compost facility. And so that's the last payment that we are receiving in 2024 on line 7. On line 11, we sold the tires that came on the loader. And those actually, we just went through the BC bid and got slightly over what we were expecting, so that's good. So on line 13, that's 8,000 that we are removing, taking out from the reserve associated with the service. And what was buying with that? Oh, actually, what we were funding, we're taking that out of reserves and transferring that to the central subregion because we are purchasing a C-can from them to use as a mechanical room for the compost facility. That's what it was for. So transfer to other services. So line 15 and 16 are funds coming in from the central subregion, and line 17 and 18 are the ones coming in from the west. And they both have a line associated with tipping fees and a line associated with whatever the deficit in the service was after all of those revenues and expenses was, that's that amount we split 50-50, and so that's a tax subsidy from both subregions to support the service. And, you know, it has been fairly high. It is starting to drop off, and it does get quite a bit lower, especially after the short-term borrowing starts to drop off. previously what we did was we actually set this based on our expected tipping fees that came in at Groman or came in at Udashenia, and then we split the rest of it 50-50. We changed the approach this year, and there's a calculation I can demonstrate at the bottom. So what we did was, instead of the actual tipping fee revenue, we based it on the expected tipping fee revenue. So we split it up so that there's variable costs and fixed costs. And so, and then we split all of the fixed costs 3 ways from the RD, from our main, there are 3 contributors. So the RDKB, the West and Central. And then we had the variable ones, and so that was split half and half with the West and with the RDKB as to, so things, and I can explain what what went into that, but essentially things like the fixed ones was anything related to capital, anything that would have had to be there regardless of whether or not we had material coming through. And then the variable was stuff where it's things like consumables, like fuel. And so the more we process, the more we would see an expense. So that's how that was broken up. And the reason why we tried to look at it this way is we felt like because the Central Subregion said that they were going to participate in this program and really haven't been sending us any volumes, it was more heavily weighting the responsibility to carry the cost of the service on the RDKB and especially on the West. And so we didn't feel like that was entirely fair. And so we tried to make it so that we split it up based on these fixed and variable costs. Another item to point out on line 16. So there was a financial plan amendment made at the end of, I think we brought this report in December to joint, where a payment, 258,000 transfer in 23 was missed, and because the year-end values weren't seen until Q3, we didn't catch that until then. So that's why the 578,000 is in 24, where only 311 was budgeted. So we did a financial plan amendment to catch up that missed transfer from 2023. And so when we're down on line 20, that deficit was noting that prior year surplus had that impact from that transfer not occurring. We do have on line 20, 390,000 surplus, and largely what that is capital funds. So we brought in capital funds to do some of the capital works, like the leachate pond and various things that we can discuss later. So those haven't proceeded in 24. So largely that's transferring those funds to support the capital works that all occur in 25. So that's it for revenues. Any questions before we move into expenses?
I don't see any questions, so go ahead.
Salaries. So we have one operator out there full time, and now that we've kind of well onboarded him, what we are looking to do is split his time 80% on the compost and 20% to do sort of transfer station related works at the central transfer station. So things like pushing piles and moving bins. So it reduced the cost of the service, and that way we're more efficient with sharing the operator of the same site. He has 2 different pieces of equipment, and any of the fuel or consumables are accounted to the proper service. So this, I think it is a win for both services. Not a lot of changes or fairly low value amounts. Getting down into contracted services, line 56, that is the cost to hire someone to come do the screening of our finished compost. Previously we had that in rental because we thought in the rental account because we thought we might be able to rent the equipment and run it ourselves, but after doing some investigating in the market, it appears that just hiring someone to come and do it is probably the way we'll start. And ideally, so on line 57, we're showing a steady decrease, and part of that cost was, it's to do a lot of it is to do with the lab work and whatnot, but it's also to drain the leachate pond. And so once we expand the leachate pond with the capital works in 2025, we're hoping to really greatly reduce that operating cost of getting the pond and disposing of it at a wastewater treatment plant or elsewhere. Repairs and maintenance. I think we had purchased tires in 24 for the new loader, and we sold the other tires to offset it. They weren't an appropriate tire. They needed chains, and that would wreck our pads. So we got better winter tires so that we didn't have to do that. So that unfortunately did put us over budget in 24. In line 66, we've got about 5,000 just as a placeholder for a separate bucket for the loader so that we can use it for biosolids and keep it separate from the other compost materials. And then we were really able to drop down things like utilities and the vehicle costs, which is largely our fuel and power. Those were placeholder values because we hadn't operated this equipment before, and we had over budgeted. So we reduced those values based on what we're seeing as actuals there. Then we get into the financing. So you can see that we've got both the facility short-term financing as well as the loader financing drop off stop like it ends by 2028. So that's greatly reduces some of the cost of the service after that period of time. And as mentioned, we changed. So in line 87, our contribution to reserves currently is 5,000. And then once that financing's done, we've increased that by 40,000. Again, the asset management will better inform if that's an appropriate number, but considering it was around a $2 million facility, we want to make sure that we have enough going into the reserves because a mixer or some of the blower systems or even the roof on the building or whatnot could be fairly costly, and I don't think that 5,000 a year is going to get us very much over the short term. So we feel more comfortable with that. Transferred other services. I put 5,000 in for the project management. So on line 89, that's the project management transfer, just because there's still a number of projects to proceed. So I've added a placeholder for their support. Line 91 is to support half of the cost for an automatic kiosk, so that way someone could come to the approved contractors could come to the transfer station, because we only have the transfer station open on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So once ICI starts up, we might need to be able to have people come during the operating hours, but hours outside when our landfill attendants are on site. So that will be shared 50-50 with the central transfer station, or the central service, right? Line 92 is a transfer to the A102 service. So again, that's 10% of the amount allocated to the waste services. 94 is for general admin, 96 is for IT, and 98 is for environmental services, and it's got a similar breakdown as the reserve recovery service. And then the last items here are the capital expenses. So previously I had these all on, almost all of them on line 100. However, some of these items are sort of big enough standalone items that finance wanted to be able to accrue them separately. So that's what the next three lines are, to break those out. So that 400,000 you see on line 124, we only proceeded with a portion of the work, and the remainder is either that 73,000 for the assorted works that you can see in the comments there. And then on line 101 is the 250 for the leachate pond expansion. or developing some sort of treatment facility to manage that material or that liquid. The 102 is for an irrigation system and potentially a pump to service it. And then line 103 is for a sanitary facility. So we're looking to purchase a small trailer that could have an emergency shower. And largely that's so to meet with requirements for sanitation for our operator, and especially when we move into managing biosolids, so that he could make sure that he's decontaminating between materials and between his work and non-work life. That's it. So then, yeah, you can see the reserve balance at the bottom. And like I said, it's not generating a lot right now, but I think in the next couple of years, we can, once we have the asset management plan, we can see if that needs to be adjusted.
Okay, thank you. Directors, any questions?
Everybody wait?
So it was an interesting budget presentation, and I'm just going to take a look at my agenda here, where we are at. I was too engrossed. Oh, public time. So is there any public on the line? Second time, is there any public on the line? Is there any questions?
John Fike from New Denver.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Thanks very much. That was so extensive. I learned a lot. I wonder, just used some numbers from page 16 of the addenda, the table 5, just for mixed waste. And, in 2024, it goes from $151 a ton to $193 a ton in 2029. And if I just graphically projected that out, if you go to 2050, then it's about $380 a ton for mixed waste. And I'm just wondering if directors and staff or RDCK and taxpayers wouldn't be well served to maybe take a long-term view, like look out 10 years, where do you want to be? And then to 2040, 2050, just to think about it. I did the same thing with just while the meeting was going on about biosolids. So now the rate goes from 60 to 88 in 2029. If that rate is continued, just graphically it goes up to $180 a ton in 2050. So I just wonder if we wouldn't be well served, or the taxpayer wouldn't be well served, to just put a vision out for 2040, 2050. Where do we want to be if it's zero waste in 2050? That's all. Thanks very much.
Thanks for the question, John. But I'll let staff answer that. I think we're obligated to do a 5-year plan. Anything beyond that, I believe we're not obligated to do that. But that might be good information, so I'll let staff respond to that.
So let me understand the question. So you're suggesting we have graphically, or in regards to projected tipping fee, a 20, 30, 40-year projection? Is that the question?
No, Uli, what I've done is I've just projected that current rate of increase is for mixed waste and biosolids. Those are the only ones I did. If you take that rate of increase from 2024 to 2029 and just project it as a straight line using the numbers off of table 5 on page 16, then you end up with $380 a ton for mixed waste. And for biosolids, you end up with $180 a ton. And I wonder, $380 a ton for mixed waste. I mean, Castlegar, imagine the tipping fee is going to, if that continues, it's just a hypothetical, but I think we might be well served to look ahead. Where do we want to be if the goal is zero waste by 2050? I mean, in terms of staffing, and if there's less waste coming in, do we have to charge more? And I don't want to belabor the point, but I just projected it, Uli, on a straight line basis, given the numbers that are there. That's all.
Yes, but I don't think that a straight line approach to the increases that you are seeing currently is the right approach. We have to take into account for both biosolids and mixed waste the catch up in a way that we have had to do in regards to regulatory requirements, in regards to not accumulating appropriate reserves for future capital costs. All of that is not proceeding the same form going forward that it does now, that it did the last 5 years and projected 5 years going forward. So I don't think that just a linear approach to the rates that you are seeing now is the right rate increase that we are going to see going forward. We can certainly do a projection. The question is always as well, do we incorporate or not incorporate the inflationary factors in here, right? So if we want a net increase to be shown, then you need to calculate the inflation factors out of this, because that's only the fair comparison to this. We certainly can do an exercise like that. Is that helpful in regards to projecting what the cost is in 20, 30 years from now? I don't know. We can take a stab at that. I'm just not sure how productive that's going to be to actually project what the future cost is going to be. What we know is that the liner cost and leachate cost for Otoshania is one that is new and will have a significant impact on the costing of disposal going forward. Is, amongst other things, one of the drivers that we say it is not feasible to continue with the landfill of the size of Nakusp because liner requirements and leachate management, amongst the other environmental monitoring and planning costs, would have driven the per unit cost, disposal cost, through the roof. But there is factors like that that are not continuing on in the future. At least we're assuming and hoping not. In fact, we don't. And then there's factors that we don't know. We don't know what leachate disposal is looking like. That is one of the questions we are pushing or trying to discuss with the Ministry of Environment, because the solutions that are available to Vancouver landfill are not available to us in regards to co-disposal with larger, massive wastewater treatment facilities. So there's unknowns there. There's cost drivers there that are momentarily here, but that will not continue on in the future. So I don't know if that explanation is helpful, but I'm open to try to come up with projections in the future. I just don't know how helpful that is with the amount of information we have at this point for a 20-year projection.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. That was a good question, but there are too many variables to even do a projection, which probably would be far out to lunch. I mean, there's an asset management plan that we don't have yet. There are legacy closures that are going to be happening. There's too many variables in there to even do any kind of a projection that could be given to the public.
And one of the things, if I may expand on this, one of the things that we did not do 10 or 15 years ago, that is actually recovering the cost for future closure. So this landfill had already, and I forget the number, 150,000 tons of waste in the landfill when we started looking at the future cost of closure that we have had to recover in order to address the need for future closure. So if you compare this, for example, to the Creston landfill, where we have gone through this process already. So the East research recovery side has gone through the painful cost recovery for formally closing the old accumulated waste. We have not done that at Utashania, but at the same time, we have recovered what is in our reserves, about 3 million or so. That's part of the increases you have seen in the past, is to put these $3 million in place to account for future closure. Is that 3 million? I forget what the number is we have here in our closure reserves. I think it is about 3 million. So that is, I think the important part is that we start to explaining to the public what the cost drivers are, what we actually have done and achieved, and what measures we have taken to account for things that we didn't do in the past, in part because we didn't know it or just the willingness wasn't there. Even today, we hear a lot of discussion about shouldn't the future generation pay for this? The approach we have taken is that we have put measures in place to account for past liabilities that we created in the past and that we had to catch up with. So
that was a good question. There are directors that are going to be dropping off. We're getting off topic here. We're at the end of our presentation, and we had one question from the public, which we've given a lot of leeway for an answer on there. So in view of the directors that are going to be dropping off, I will entertain a motion. Go ahead, Amy.
So I guess what, just to discuss about next steps, so we don't currently have any other specific budget meetings. The intention was that if there was anything significant, we might, especially in the year-end values, we might need to come back to you. And whether or not if they're not too time consuming, our intention was just to actually adjust or accommodate that through our upcoming joint meetings. Should it be significant, we would look to have another one, but at this point, I didn't see anything significant here, and there was that one adjustment for the Healthy Community Societies to increase it for that extra Jerrican of that 1,750. That adjustment is really the only one that I described in the meeting today. So I guess, is there any comments or concerns about moving forward that way?
I do have a concern. I'd like to see another budget meeting with all the final figures on there, so we take a final look. There are some adjustments that you have already made that we don't have on paper here. So if we can schedule another meeting, before approval.
What would be a suggested time for that?
And I would, take a look at you. I guess we need the finals.
So my comment on that is that if the year-end values are quite close to what it is, the only adjustment we have to make here is less than $2,000. I don't think the meeting would cost us more than that. So I think I could update the budget and with that minor adjustment and send it out. And then if there is anything significant from the year-end values, then we could even work on looking for a placeholder, because we could do a doodle poll and see if there's potential. But I think unless there's something significant coming from the year-end values, I think we could easily address it at an upcoming joint meeting.
To address 3 budgets at the joint meeting?
Well, I don't know that the other ones will have anything to address.
I mean, what we would do in these meetings is look at red line versions, which lines have changed. We would not go into the basic discussion of why we have whatever $2,000 an item. We had that opportunity today, I believe. I think the focus would be on any kind of changes in comparison to what we have here, and if need be, any form of resolution in regards to use of the what do we call the reserve? The stabilization reserve in any form. right? So I don't know that that is enough to have another meeting. I just want to point out we are conducting about 3 meetings a week currently in regards to budget preparations. There's for the utilities, you're familiar with CFC meetings and commission meetings that we are having while we are continuing to work on budget. So the question is, where would we best fit in another sub-regional meeting times 3, if that's what's required? So my hope was hope that we provide a red line version at the next joint meeting that's focused around the final, hopefully as close as possible, final budgets, and get the odd resolution for any kind of changes that you see to these final budgets.
Okay, so I have 3 directors that want to speak.
Yep.
And, you've heard what staff has said. So I've got Director Main, Director Hanegraaff, and Director McFadden. So go ahead, Director Main.
Oh, you're muted.
Director Main, you're muted.
Sorry, I just didn't click that hard enough. This refers back to John Fike's question and Uli's answer, where Uli said that we need to be able to explain to the public why these fees and charges are going up and up and up. And that refers back to what I said at the beginning of this meeting. I need, as a director, I need a piece that I can refer to, that I can give to people or use to explain to people, my counsel included, why these fees and charges are going up and up and up. Nobody outside of this room understands the complexity of resource recovery. And it's really difficult to explain it without some materials from the experts, and that would include Uli and that would include Yev to develop that piece. Thank you.
Through the chair, I don't think that would be a problem to develop some speaking notes for directors for budget purposes.
Okay, is that okay for you, where Amy will develop some speaking notes for directors that have to report to their municipalities?
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So Director Hanegraaff.
Yeah, I put my name in before staff spoke. My only thing is it has to be a red line version, otherwise I will lose my mind. I'm fine with what staff is suggesting, a red line version in conjunction with the joint meeting. If we have to meet at all on this, I really have no interest in going over the whole thing front to back again. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. Director McFadden.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I'll kind of echo what Director Hanegraaff said. I think it's a waste of our time and money to have another meeting to actually go over stuff that I'm very comfortable with what staff has presented. It doesn't seem like there's really any discussion on any of it. It's all necessary expenses. That's why I asked at the beginning about the increases and what they're for. It's not for anything we really had debate over. So my fear is that we will waste all of our time by asking questions and debating things that really we don't have control over at this moment in time. So I'm fine with getting those at joint, and hopefully we don't rehash out things we've already talked about and keep our time valuable. So thank you to staff. I have to jump off. We have another RDCK meeting that I have to get to. So I will talk to you all later. Thanks, Walter.
Okay, thank you, Director McFadden.
I have to go to the same meeting, so I'm going to leave too. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye. So just one question I'm going to ask. Is there anybody that are online opposed to what staff suggested? If not, we'll follow with what staff suggested, as long as they produce some speaking notes for the municipal directors that have to report to their councils. I don't see anybody that has any objections, so we'll leave that, but I will give the last word to staff. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just one thing I wanted to ask or maybe share as a comment is we had discussed trying to have site visits at Nakusp and the new transfer stations and at Udashenia. Obviously that budget meeting got deferred, so the visit changed. One thing I wanted to suggest is potentially looking at doing a ribbon cutting at one or more of the new transfer stations in the West and sort of coordinating a trip to visit some of those. Don't know if we want to wait until too far into the year. So just to let you guys know that we're looking at dates for that. And if you have any preferences or comments in that regard to let us know, and just to let you know that we're still intending to try and coordinate some site visits. And it would be good to have another, probably on a separate day, do something at Udashenia so that we can spend some time at the landfill and discuss the future development plans.
Including potential participation from provincial side for the ribbon cutting, if that's what we do.
Absolutely. I mean, my take on it is if we can do like Otashania separately, because that's a bigger, and that's one, well, that's their only landfill now, or going to be. So we should do a site visit there and invite Central and if they want to come to that site visit, but then, to cover the expenses for the directors or whatever, the travel expenses specifically, we should have a meeting. Otherwise, we won't be able to do that. And a West Resource Recovery meeting.
Yeah, this is independent from each other. The one will be in the spring for the landfill as originally intended. The other one should be done in a reasonable time frame because in part it is as well recognition for the grant funding that went into these projects.
Yeah, and staff, you can figure the opportune time to do that. Everything else, so when the ribbon cutting, invite the appropriate provincial staff to that, and we'll do the ribbon cutting, and then we'll have a meeting and discuss. Okay, is there anybody has any other suggestions? If none, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Director Main, and we have a seconder, Director Weatherhead. Oh, do you want to ask a question, Director Weatherhead? Okay.
Thank you.
Any objection to adjournment? No objection. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Hey, let us sign in.
I will do that right now.